We are now going to discuss a CAT 2006 RC passage on critical attitude and dogmatic attitude. Now, this passage was selected to be included in chapter 6, which was about grammar syntax. So, the important point was that your comfort level with the flow of the grammar syntax helps you overcome one of the hurdles to reading comprehension. If you cannot unravel the meaning of sentences as you read, at every stage, this acts as a hurdle because you're getting confused because ideas are getting all jumbled up. So I found that in this passage, there were many very long sentences with many semicolons and dashes, etc., etc. Though the ideas were fairly clearly expressed, but long sentences sometimes can bother some of you. So, through reading over time of such intellectual passages, naturally the grammar syntax gets internalized. So, you don't have to specially work for it, but this is one area you should be aware of. So, now let's go and see the passage. The very first sentence of this paragraph is so long. So let's just read the whole sentence and see what is it saying. Our propensity to look out for regularities and to impose laws upon nature leads to the psychological phenomena of dogmatic thinking, or more generally dogmatic behavior, colon, we expect regularities everywhere and attempt to find them even when there are none, semicolon. Events which do not yield to these attempts we are inclined to treat as a kind of background knowledge, semicolon, and we stick to our expectations even when they are inadequate and we ought to accept defeat. So, I mean, this could have been broken down, but the whole point being brought out here is so is introducing what is dogmatic thinking. And we have a tendency to look for regularity. It means order in the universe, right? Order in the things that happen around. So we try to impose laws, and even if there are random occurrings of all kinds, we still try to fit them in some kind of patterns. So why do we do that? Because there's a innate need in humans for order. So we try to impose order on nature and on the things that we see around us. So then this is what this para was basically saying. This dogmatism is to some extent necessary. A short sentence, crisp. So whenever there's a crisp sentence, now that short sentence is full, pregnant with meaning. So this kind of tendency to look for order and therefore impose laws on nature is to some extent necessary. Now why is it necessary? It is demanded by a situation which can only be dealt with by forcing our conjectures upon the world. Moreover, this dogmatism allows us to approach a good theory in stages by way of approximations, colon. If we accept defeat too easily, we may prevent ourselves from finding that we were very nearly right. So, okay, again, a longish sentence. Uh, so, why is it dogmatism necessary? Because we must try to make sense of the world around us with whatever tools we have. So, let's say man observed that, there were different stars and other things in the sky. So, man said, okay, so we are the center of the universe and other bodies are rotating around us. And obviously, to see order in the universe, we assumed that the all other, the sun, moon, every other planet or star or whatever, is rotating around us in a circular orbit, because circle was the most simplest way to, the most geometrically easy way to understand. So now the fact that we need this order, a sense of order, because psychologically otherwise we feel uncertainty, confusion, our lives seem meaningless simply because if everything is random, then what the hell are we doing here? What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of all this universe? So, to that there is a need for a psychological need to have order because it is very satisfying. So then we try to make sense of the world around us, and when we try to make sense of the world around us, we make educated guesses. Those are conjectures or surmises or let's say theories, right? And we, whatever strikes us as logical or rational, we come up with such theories. So the author is calling this dogmatic thinking. And then we stick to that. We start believing in that theory, that is the way things are, right? We believe in a geocentric view of the whole universe, that Earth is at the center, right? Or people thought Earth is flat because they thought you could keep going and then reach one edge where and then fall off the disk or whatever. So these were conjectures. Now, what he's later saying is that this dogmatism allows us to approach a good theory in stages. So, first we thought the earth was flat, then we probably improved upon it and found no, it has to be spherical because otherwise, how can we, as we go higher, we can see further. So, there must be a curvature. So, so new theory. So, we change that theory a bit. So by way of such approximations, you can keep improving your theory. So hence this simple desire to uh, guess or impose laws upon nature, that dogmatic thinking is a good thing. It is a necessary thing. But that's how then we start we start the process of acquiring knowledge, right? We come up with some theory, then we improve upon it in stages, and gradually it becomes a better theory, right? If we just accept that, okay, we can't understand, we can't make sense of the world, then we will never find that we were almost there, that we were halfway right after all. So, this is what the first para is. So, in a way, he's introducing, since the topic he's going to talk about is critical attitude and dogmatic attitude, or critical thinking and dogmatic thinking, he has first described what is dogmatic thinking. Then he tries to explain this vis-a-vis critical thinking. So let's go to para 2. It is clear that this dogmatic attitude, which makes us stick to our first impressions. So first impressions is that the earth is flat or the earth is the center of the universe. We stick to it dogmatically. And uh, we don't want any contradictions. We only want to verify and confirm this view. We strongly believe in this because there's a need for us to believe in this. That gives us a sense of certainty, order in around us. As opposed to this, there is the other attitude in humans, while a critical attitude which is ready to modify its tenets, which admits doubt and demands test, is indicative of a weaker belief. So, critical attitude is one which is constantly looking to question, doubt, refute, ready to modify, change it if required, and improve upon it, superimpose on it some improvements, right? So that is always critical of what exists. So even if through critical attitude you come across with a better, a slightly improved theory, that still is further open to being further improved or further changed or further modified. So you never believe that this is the end result. So the critical attitude is indicative of a weaker relief. This, what I've said, is not so clear here, but will become clear later. So I've had the benefit of understanding this passage first, and now I'm explaining. You are also expected to see this video only after you have done this passage from my book, attempted the questions, understood the explanatory answers, and then uh, watch this video. That is the order in which you have to do it. Okay. So he's shown both these attitudes, given you an idea. Dogmatic attitude, stick to first impressions. Critical attitude, doubt, modify, ready to change, etc. Now, according to Hume's theory, and so the now shows that he's kind of, let's say, digressing a bit or giving another twist to it. So now, according to Hume's theory and to the popular theory, the strength of a belief should be a product of repetition. So there's one theory that if you keep repeating with time, if you keep repeating a thing that there is God, or the earth is round, or the earth is flat, or the earth is the center of the universe, over time you start then believing it, and you acquire you acquire a strong belief in it, because then it is true. A thing repeated 1,000 times over a period will, obviously, you will strongly believe it. So this is one theory. Thus, if that theory is correct, thus it should always grow with experience. That means as you grow older from childhood onwards, gain experience, maturity, so there'll be more time in your life that the same thing will be repeated, that God exists, let's say, or earth is the center of the universe, etc., and always be greater and less primitive people. So that means as civilizations advance, so he's comparing growth in experience and maturity of a person from childhood to adult, or from a primitive person or primitive societies to advanced societies. The stronger belief should come later. That means a child should have weak belief, a primitive man should have, a primitive society should have weak beliefs. And with passage of time, with repetition, constant repetition, as a child grows into an adult, his belief should become stronger. As a primitive society becomes an advanced society, the belief in certain things should become stronger. So this is the logical offshoot of, let's say, Hume's theory, that strong belief comes with repetition. But now, with a but, he is trying to show that what he has observed or what otherwise can be seen, but dogmatic thinking and uncontrolled wish to impose order or regularities, a manifest, a displayed pleasure, an evident pleasure in rites, rituals, etc., and in repetition as such, is characteristics of primitives and children. So, do you agree with him? So, let's see, what do primitives and children do? Children who have little knowledge, they also want order, right? If parents tell a child, don't tell a lie, and the child hears the father tell a lie to somebody else, he is unsettled, because he says that there's no order in this universe. There is some rule which I have to follow, but my father is not following it. So anyway, so similarly, a primitive person would uh, also want order, is looking for order in the universe, and he then prays to rain god, he prays to the sun god, he prays to a tree, because he finds that some benefits are received from these heavenly bodies and this nature's things, right? So this is probably what he's referring to, that dogmatic thinking which wants to impose order and which takes pleasure in rites and in repetition. So, primitive societies, if you have noticed, they, after the hunting is over, they will have a victory dance in front of a bonfire, or the medicine man will chant some things so that to appease the rain god, so that the rain god is bountiful this monsoon or something, right? So they keep repeating the same rites and rituals with the hope that the rain god will shower rains on them, right? Similarly, a child, he takes pleasure in rites and rituals. Children, when they get together to play, they will start with, let's say, chalo ghar ghar khelte hai. And then again the same things. Okay, tum chai banao, ye plate hai, ye cup hai, etc., etc. or ringa, ringa, ringa roses, husha, husha, we all fall down. They'll keep doing that, right? Or train, train, they'll keep playing train, train. So if you notice that this repetitive kind of a behavior, uh, and obviously a strong belief that that behavior is productive work and bringing us happiness and bringing us benefits, both in children and primitives, you can actually draw a parallel and see that both kind of behave similarly. And with increasing experience and maturity, sometimes people acquire a attitude of caution and criticism rather than dogmatism. So, with experience, as a primitive society becomes a more advanced society, then they realize that rain is not going to happen because of our prayers or our rites and rituals and other things, right? Just because we did a victory dance doesn't mean that tomorrow we'll get a lot of animals to hunt and so on and so forth. So, gradually with time, this strong belief in certain limited things which impose order in their lives, that gradually gets diluted and people start looking at things critically. So he's in a way drawn an analogy here, right? A child is to a primitive as an adult is to an advanced society, or as a child grows to an adult, he goes from dogmatic attitude to critical attitude. As a primitive society advances to advanced society, it goes from a dogmatic attitude to a critical attitude. So, this is how he's trying to bring out how dogmatic thinking or attitude comes earlier, then comes critical attitude with more experience. When you see that, just repeating things, whatever you thought was right and you keep repeating it, things are not going to happen. You find nothing is happening, so therefore you modify, you're ready to change your thinking, and you're open to criticism of it. You express doubt and question it. So this is the thought process he is building here. Right, let's come to para 3. So, first two paras, we recall in our minds what was said. Now, my logical criticism of Hume's psychological theory and the considerations connected with it may seem a little removed from the field of the philosophy of science. So, he says, I have digressed there for a while, and you may wonder what it has to do with the basic core topic that we are discussing, which is part of the philosophy of science. Basically, how through science we acquire knowledge and how knowledge grows as we evolve as a civilization. So, so leave that digression aside. That's what he's saying. But the distinction between dogmatic and critical thinking, or the dogmatic and the critical attitude, brings us right back to our central problem, which is the central problem of the philosophy of science. So he's saying, let's come back to this basic point, which I want to discuss in my passage. Now, just see such a long sentence again. For the dogmatic attitude is clearly related to the tendency to verify our laws and schemata by seeking to apply them and to confirm them, even to the point of neglecting refutations, whereas the critical attitude is one of readiness to change them, dash to test them, to refute them, to falsify them if possible. So this is quite a mouthful to take, but again, let's divide them into points. Dogmatic attitude, you want to, earlier we read that you stick to your first impression. So you say earth is round or earth is flat or earth is the center of the universe, right? And you stick to that impression. And after that, you believe in it strongly and you want to, at any given time, only want to verify it. If any evidence comes which tends to refute it, you set it aside. You're blind to all those. You're only seeking to confirm them that they are correct, even to the point of neglecting refutation. So when there is a clear thing that, listen, the curvature of the earth is round, you'll say no, earth is flat. See, We are walking straight. Can you see? Are we walking over a curve? Just see. For a mile, we've been just walking flat, okay, on a flat surface. So, this is how dogmatic attitude works. You stick to your first impressions. You only want to, like as you're walking, you only want to confirm that yes, Earth is flat, Earth is flat. And if at some point somebody shows that no, no, see, now I've climbed a tree, now I can see further. When I was walking, I could see only this much. Now I can see that lake ahead, right? How can I see it? If the Earth was flat, why couldn't I see it when I was standing on the ground? So you anything which refutes it, you say you'll set that aside, you will shrug it off, right? Because you strongly believe that the earth is flat. Right, okay. Let's move on to critical attitude. Whereas the critical attitude is one of readiness to change. That means you're constantly open to change, open to question, open to doubt, to test them, to refute them, to falsify them if possible. So, critical attitude is, let's say, a negative attitude. I mean, if you would like to see it, you are just negative in everything. Somebody says something, no, I don't believe it. Tell me, show me how. No, it could be this way also. So, this is how a person with a critical attitude would behave, is constantly working to negate what is being said by others as true or as a reality or the truth. So, this suggests that we may identify the critical attitude with the scientific attitude. So, he sees that the role of science is to criticize and therefore arrive at the truth or approximations to the truth, right, through such an approach. And the dogmatic attitude with the one which we have described as pseudoscientific. So dogmatic attitude is why the word scientific first, pseudo we can see later, because finally you are trying to give it some laws. You are trying to impose laws on nature. You are trying to say Earth is flat. You are trying to make sense of the world around you, or you are trying to say that Earth is the center of the universe. But you are saying it out of just conjecture. You are not uh, just out of a sense of a feel for order. So that is why he is calling that pseudoscientific and critical attitude as the scientific. So this is one particular view. You see, this is probably not the view that we already hold or have been taught in school as to what is science, what is the scientific approach, that first you observe, then you form hypothesis, then you make experiment and then conduct experiments to confirm it, and then mathematically you form mathematical equations, and thereby your the theories are formed and then laws are formed which confirm and which is a universal law which applies all across. That's how science works, from observation to hypothesis to experimentation to theories and to laws. This is how we have understood. Now you got to reject that, put that all aside, and see how he's developing his thinking, right? Afresh on a clean slate. So this suggests that we may identify critical attitude with scientific and dogmatic with pseudo-scientific. Okay. And we have seen in the last para that dogmatic attitude is seen in children and primitives. So in a way, it comes earlier in the evolution of things. And then you acquire a criticism towards it and acquire a critical attitude, right? So it further suggests that genetically speaking, the pseudo-scientific attitude is more primitive and prior to the scientific attitude, that it is a pre-scientific attitude. So, in order of things, in passage of time, if you see human evolution on a, let's say, timeline, you will see dogmatic reflection of dogmatic attitude in earlier primitive societies where they believed in different gods and all kinds of things, right? And then, of course, science and reason replaced religion and so on and so forth. So, it is a this dogmatic attitude, that kind of a strong belief in things without just to feel order in the universe, like belief in God is a simple need. We need to believe in God, only then things make sense, right? So we get order in our life just because by believing in God. And so that is dogmatic attitude. That's a reflection of dogmatic attitude. While a scientific person will, like as a kid, I kept asking my father, prove it, prove that God exists, right? I reject that he exists. So I refuted, and he, of course, tried to prove it. But let's go on. So, dogmatic attitude is pre scientific or pseudo scientific, critical attitude is scientific. And this primitivity or priority also has its logical aspect. The logical aspect is that obviously you need first a dogmatic attitude. Without it, you have nothing to work on, right? People thought that there is a God to bring order in the universe. You now at least have this God theory to refute, otherwise, you would have had nothing, right? So let's see. For the critical attitude is not so much opposed to the dogmatic attitude as superimposed upon it. So critical attitude will not say God doesn't exist at all, but it will try to say God, what you're saying is nothing but nature, this universe, which came through with a big bang, not that God existed all the time or something, right? So you are superimposing on the God theory that God is nothing but nature or the universe, right? So critical attitude is not so much opposed to the dogmatic attitude. It needs the dogmatic attitude to come up with a God theory to start with, and then superimpose upon it further to see what it can add to it. So criticism must be directed towards existing and influential beliefs in need of critical revision. Now, if you have nothing, society believes in nothing and says, okay, we are sitting in uncertainty, ambiguity, you please scientists keep working and get us some theory and some truth. Tell us what is this world all about. That's not how human beings have acquired knowledge, right? So you have to start with dogmatic beliefs. So now coming back to para 1 where he said this dogmatism is to an extent necessary, this makes sense now. It is necessary because you must have dogmatic beliefs to start with. And therefore, on top of that, then critical attitude can be applied to work on it and improve, superimpose on it and improve it. And keep improving it endlessly, maybe, right? So a critical attitude needs for its raw material, as it were, theories and beliefs which are held more or less dogmatically. So dogmatic attitude gives theories and beliefs which become the raw material on which, so in a way, pre-science or pseudoscience gives us this, and then science starts. The science takes off only when this raw material is available to them, and then they examine it and then build further knowledge beyond it, build on it, modify it, go closer to, approximate closer to the truth. So this is the kind of theory that in this field of philosophy of science is emerging. So para 4, thus science must begin with myths and with the criticism of myths, colon, neither with the collection of observations nor with the invention of experiments, comma, but with the critical discussion of myths and of magical techniques and practices. Now again, a 3-line sentence and a lot of ideas put together. So first line, of course, is repeating what we just saw, that it must begin with those dogmatic beliefs and theories, which he calls now myths, and critical attitude should criticize them and thereby superimpose on them. So this first part before the semicolon is what it has been said. And then he's trying to correct your already, the perception you already have about science, that science is neither with the collection of observation. Science job is not to start with the collection of observations, nor with the invention of experiments, as you've been taught in school. Okay? So he is trying to correct your thinking and say, forget that, what you have learned. Right? So it's not, science does not start with the collection of observations or with the invention of experiments, but with the critical discussion of myths and all whatever dogmatic attitude, whatever it has thrown up. So the scientific tradition is distinguished from the pre-scientific tradition in having two layers. So what does the critical attitude or scientific attitude do? Like the dogmatic attitude, so I will science and pre-science, I'll continue with dogmatic critical so that we stick with one word, one set of words. So like the latter, that means the critical attitude, like the dogmatic attitude, passes on its theories. That means dogmatic attitude also passes us theories, myths, all this stuff, right? Similarly, scientific, the critical attitude also passes on this, right? But the critical attitude also passes on a critical attitude towards. That means what you get out of a science is a package. Let's say Einstein's theory of relativity in a box received from Amazon, and on this you have a big label. Look at it with critical attitude. That means even if science gives you anything, it is with further critical attitude to be continue to be applied on it. If the universal law of gravitation, as propounded by Newton, we consider it as a law, but as per the view expressed here, it is not a law. It is a theory with which again is labeled. Look at it with critical attitude. That means science looks everything, every product of science itself, which is an improved upon product of dogmatic attitude, and whatever product of critical attitude that comes out in science, that also is constantly open to criticism and to questioning, because it passes on the critical attitude towards them along with it. So critical attitude remains stuck as a label onto those theories and laws. So the theories are passed on not as dogmas. So science does not give you dogmas. You can't say, oh, I believe in the law of gravitation. It is the ultimate. Nothing can escape this, right? You can't be dogmatic about anything that science has given you, but rather with the challenge to discuss them and improve upon them. So science is constantly, it's a constant ad infinitum process of up to infinity, continue discussing and improving upon it, right? So this view of science we have never, it's a unique view. So this author is giving us a unique view, and so let's appreciate it for its uniqueness. The critical attitude, the tradition of free discussion of theories with the aim of discovering their weak spots so that they may be improved upon, is the attitude of reasonableness, of rationality. So this he is saying, science is therefore reasonable and rational, and critical attitude, science, reasonableness, rationality all go together. From the point of view here developed, that means the point of view which I have developed in this article or in this passage, all laws of science, all theories that you know of, even let's say law of conservation of mass and energy, which are universal laws, which are irrefutable, supposedly, right, remain. He's saying these, as per the view expressed by us here, developed here, such laws which we think are irrefutable remain essentially tentative or conjectural or hypothetical. They are never final. They'll never be final. Science will never give you dogma. Science will only give you some law theory which with the critical attitude attached to it. So even when we feel unable to doubt them any longer, even when we are convinced that by God, yeah, I tried every possible thing, everywhere the bloody law of gravitation is applicable. Now I can't really refute it, I can't falsify it. So what do I do? My critical attitude has run out of steam. So he says, remain open. Keep it open to questioning. You can't do it today, maybe tomorrow, because before a theory has been refuted, we can never know in what way it may have to be modified. So, tomorrow, maybe something you will observe in some other field, and then you'll say, oh, gravitation doesn't apply here. And you'll get something to refute it and then modify it. So therefore, the scientific attitude is you never know when you'll have to change it. So anytime in future, so be always open to modification, to questioning. Everything is tentative. No knowledge acquired through science or by human beings through any way is final. Everything is tentative. This may not appeal to us uh, psychologically to people who are looking for order and stability in this universe. If everything is, still doubtful or only tentative, then what the hell, yeah? What is the point of things? Why can't we get to the truth? So, this is the kind of discussions that takes place in this field of philosophy of science, which is a, let's say, earlier the same field used to be called epistemology, related to the science of knowledge, that how man acquires knowledge, which are the ways, etc., etc. And you say philosophy of science is a subject which no one has ever taught us. So this is an area you must read. And two, if you see the style of his writing, he rather keeps adding on and making long, long sentences. But still, his punctuations and all were helped us. So therefore, you must internalize the grammar syntax in a way that such long sentences don't come as obstacles to your understanding. So this passage was particularly included in chapter 6, which you should otherwise do completely. But understand that grammar syntax, unraveling meaning from long sentences can be an obstacle to reading comprehension. On top of it, subject is new. On top of it, the whole perspective that is twist that is giving to thing is new. So you can get lost in such a passage. Okay, let's go on to the questions. Okay, before going on to the questions, I made this table. So this is like a mind map of the thought flow, right? So there's the dogmatic attitude, which comes first, comes with children among primitives. Critical attitude, then with time you acquire critical attitude, and it comes with as you grow, become adults, where you're able to live with uncertainty, ambiguity in life. Similarly, it comes with progress in society and civilization as civilizations become more advanced. The first is pre scientific or pseudo scientific because it comes first. Second is scientific. The dogmatic attitude basically wants to put order around, so it whatever conjectures it comes up with, it seeks to stick to the conjectures and only verify and confirm them. Anything that any evidence that is refuting it, they will just brush it aside. They'll be blind to it, neglect it. While scientific attitude will not look for things that are confirming or verifying it. They will only question, doubt, refute, reject, and falsify whatever hypotheses, conjectures, theories, laws are thrown before it. So there are two diametrically opposite mental ways of thinking. Dogmatic attitude emerges from a psychological need for order in society, and so we impose laws on nature. And while imposing laws on nature, we come up with conjectures, myths, hypotheses, and theories, right? These serve as raw material for the critical attitude. Hence, this raw material is critical and essential and necessary. If the dogmatic attitude was not there, you would not have conjectures, myths, and hypotheses as the raw material on which the critical attitude or the scientific attitude could work on. So now let's come to the right hand column. So critical attitudes need these myths given by the dogmatic attitude as raw material to work on. And what does critical attitude do? While trying to question, doubt, refute, reject, falsify, it ends up modifying it, superimposing new things on it, spotting weaknesses, improving upon. But what it finally gives after all this is again tentative theories. No, no big deal. There's nothing final coming out from here, which you can believe in perfectly. So it gives us tentative theories which remain forever open to question with the label attached, critical view with critical attitude. So science will always have a weak belief even in the Einstein's theory of relativity or Newton's law of gravitation or on the universal law of the let's say mass and space energy being constant, right? So scientific attitude, critical attitude will always reflect a weak belief in whatever things, because it's ever ready to question, doubt, refute, reject, falsify. And dogmatic attitude will always stick to whatever conjectures, myths, hypotheses, theories they come up with, and strongly believe in them and only look for that evidence which verifies and confirms them and makes their view further stronger. So this is virtually the summary of the passage. Now let's go to the question. This passage came in CAT 2006. There were 5 questions. I have not added any questions to this passage. The 5 questions we are doing are CAT questions, and I'll be giving you the CAT answer, official answer. So, question 1. In the context of science, according to the passage, the interaction of dogmatic beliefs and critical attitude can be best described as a duel between two warriors in which one has to die. No, science doesn't replace totally, it doesn't kill the earth centric theory that earth is the center of the universe, but it modifies and says that no, sun is the center of, let's say, our solar system, right? The effect of a chisel on a marble stone while making a sculpture. This sounds a little better. Let's see further. A feed share, that means natural gas going in the fertilizer industry, which is in gas form and is being transformed into fertilizers, into a solid form. So this shows major transformation from a raw material to end product. So this is not, we're talking of in slow approximations coming on to a better theory and then further improving with another approximation. So you're coming to greater and greater approximations to truth. That is the process on which how knowledge grows from dogmatic to critical attitude. The effect of fertilizers on a sapling, no, it's not that some nourishment is given for the sapling to grow into a tree or something. So obviously option is 2, the analogy. The analogy is critical attitude guy is sitting, the marble stone is, let's say, the geocentric theory of the universe, that earth is the center of the universe. So with a chisel he's trying to chop off the loose ends and trying to show no, it is, we are revolving, relative to this and so the question of relativity, etc. So it is superimposing and improving upon, spotting the weaknesses and coming up with a new shape which is closer to a more approximation to the truth. So option 2 is the best analogy. Question 2. According to the passage, the role of a dogmatic attitude or dogmatic behavior in the development of science is critical and important, as without it, initial hypotheses or conjectures can never be made. Yes, straight away. You don't have to look at anything, because that is from where critical attitude of science gets the raw material. Science doesn't observe things. Science doesn't start with observations or making experiments and all that stuff which you were taught in school. That's not the view expressed in this passage. Here it is the dogmatic attitude which is giving you. If you didn't have the geocentric uh, theory of the universe, you wouldn't know where to start from. So without it, initial hypotheses and conjectures can never be made. So it is critical. That's why it's come first. So that's why there's a logical aspect to dogmatic coming first, because then only you have raw material to proceed on. The others, let's quickly see positive as conjectures arising become science. Okay, but its role is positive. It is critical, it is essential, it is a necessary condition. It's not just a positive thing. Negative as it leads to pseudoscience, so that's wrong. Inferior because critical leads to attitude of reasonableness, so there's no inferior. So we're both, one needs the other. So question 2 answer is 1. Question 3, dogmatic behavior in this passage has been associated with primitives and children. Right? It's pre-science, it comes first. Which of the following best describes the reason why the author compares primitives with children? So primitives are people who are not educated and hence can be compared with children who are yet to go through schooling. Okay, next, primitives are people who, though not modern, are as innocent as children. Primitives are people in the early stages of human evolution. Children are in the early stages of their lives. This is exactly because the whole issue was of repetition. That how four primitives are people who are not civilized, just as children are. So no question of civilization here. We're talking of knowledge, right? So primitives are compared with children that they show dogmatic thinking, the beliefs in rites and rituals and repetition of the same rain dance, victory dance, the same games kids keep playing and enjoying, having fun because they have a strong belief that those are so important to our lives. They give us so much fun, right? And so that's why children and primitives are compared as opposed to adults and advanced society. So obviously, the analogy as expressed in 3 is the correct option. Which of the following statements best supports the argument in the passage that a critical attitude leads to a weaker belief than a dogmatic one does? So, again, a critical attitude by definition is centered on an analysis of anomalies and noise. Okay, noise anyway. Uh, Weak spots, it is critical attitude. But why does Matt make it a weak view? That's not the point. A critical attitude leads to questioning everything, yes, and in the process generates noise without any conviction. Now, what is this noise? Okay, noise was said in some context, I think, in the very first para. A second para talked about the strong belief and weak belief kind of a thing. 3, a critical attitude is antithetical to conviction, which is required for strong beliefs. Now, this seems to be a kind of a always true statement, a statement which is always true. Critical attitude is against strong is opposed to strong views. So antithetical to conviction. Conviction means strong views. Right? Conviction is required for stronger beliefs. Conviction means you have a strong belief. So critical attitude is the opposite of strong beliefs. Therefore, you can, let's say, critical attitude leads to weak beliefs. So this is what 3 is actually telling you. So I found that many coaching centers like Time and others had ticked 3 here. In question 3, they had ticked, which are they ticked? They had ticked, I think, first option or something. Okay. So where were we? So answer of 4 is 4. A critical attitude leads to questioning and to tentative hypothesis. Because that word tentative is that whatever theories and laws emerge. So last para, the word tentative has a stamp of critical attitude attached to it. It passes on its theories with, along with it, the critical attitude attached with it. That means this theory is not final. I'm just giving it because it's the best we have. Well, make the best use of it to whatever extent is possible. But this is the best we have. But it's tentative. I don't believe in it myself. I have a weak belief in it, right? So it's tentative. You also have a weak belief in it, but see whatever use you can make of it. So this is the answer. Critical attitude leads to a weaker belief because it's everything remains open to question for it. Otherwise, critical attitude will not exist. Once critical attitude ends up believing what is has finally made, then it will become a dogmatic attitude. The very nature of it will change. So that is why 4 is the answer of question 4. Okay, the last question. According to the passage, which of the following statements best describes the difference between science and pseudoscience? So laws and theories are permanent and immutable, unchangeable, right? This obviously is totally away from whatever has been said, whereas pseudosciences are contingent on the bullshit. Science is always Science always allows the possibility of rejecting a theory or hypothesis, yes, whereas pseudoscience seeks to validate their ideas or theories. So this best describes the difference. So 2 seems okay. 3. Science focuses on anomalies and exceptions so that fundamental truths can be uncovered, whereas pseudosciences focus mainly on general truths. Nowhere we've talked about this. Science progresses by collection of observations and by experimentation. The author says it is neither with the collection of observation nor with the experimentation. So clearly the answer is 2. So, though we understood far more than what the questions could, test us for, this passage is an amazing example of one, it exposes you to the field of philosophy of science, which Zat comes up with a lot of passages by Karl Popper and others, right? On this aspect. So, philosophy of science is a favorite subject of the ZAT examiner. So, this is one area you must read on. The other point you must understand is that these academicians and some of these people, they tend to write long winded sentences and express their ideas in rather complex ways. Okay, they just feel that their ideas are so complex, they should be presented in a very complex compound sentences. So that should not deter you from trying to understand them. For that, your own understanding of uh, the grammar syntax or grammar structure, that this is a phrase, this is a subject, this is a verb, this is an object, and so on. And this is the main clause, this is an adverb clause of purpose, etc., etc. Right? All that understanding you should be able to break down and read in those thought units. You should be able to read in those thought units. It should be so internalized in your mind that it just comes naturally to you. So before it comes naturally, you have to practice a lot of it. Then, and with gradual reading and a reading habit of such intellectual kind of passages, naturally it will further get internalized. So with this, today's task is complete.